"Ma'am, step away from the counter." The command was sharp, laced with authority and suspicion. The two armed security guards moved in swiftly, hands hovering over their holsters as though she were a dangerous criminal. Cassandra Holloway, a woman accustomed to commanding rooms filled with executives and power players, now found herself at the center of an absurd and humiliating spectacle. Her own bank, her own money, and yet she was being treated like a fraud. The entire bank had gone still. Customers paused their transactions. Tellers stopped mid-conversation. A man in the back pulled out his phone, already recording. The thick tension in the air grew heavier as whispers spread through the crowd. "I need you to leave the premises immediately," the teller behind the counter said, his voice dripping with condescension. A young man, no older than 25, with an overinflated sense of authority. His name tag read Kyle. Cassandra's fingers curled into fists at her sides, but her face remained composed. "Leave? After I just requested a withdrawal." Kyle scoffed. "We don't entertain scams here, ma'am." A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. Cassandra inhaled deeply, forcing herself to remain calm. She had faced hostile boardrooms, cutthroat investors, and billion-dollar negotiations. But this was different. This was personal. "You think I'm a scammer?" she asked, her voice even, but the dangerous edge beneath it was unmistakable. "You walk in here claiming to be Cassandra Holloway, CEO of Holloway National Bank, expecting me to believe that?" Kyle chuckled mockingly. "Lady, I wasn't born yesterday. The real Cassandra Holloway doesn't walk into bank branches like a regular person. She has people who handle that for her. So nice try." Cassandra's lips pressed into a thin line. The sheer absurdity of the situation almost made her laugh. Almost. Instead, she took a slow step forward, placing her hands on the counter. "Listen to me very carefully." The taller of the two security guards cut in, shifting slightly to block her movement. "We don't want trouble, ma'am, but if you refuse to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to escort you out." Her gaze snapped to him. "And if I don't leave?" The shorter guard, a stocky man with a stern expression, reached for his radio. "Dispatch, we've got a situation at Holloway National, downtown branch. Possible fraud suspect refusing to comply. Requesting immediate assistance." The words sent a chill through the room. People gasped. A woman near the lone desk whispered, "Is this really happening?" Cassandra's patience snapped. "I want to speak to your branch manager. Right now." Kyle rolled his eyes. "Oh, sure. I'll get right on that," he said sarcastically before turning to the guards. "Go ahead and remove her." The taller guard stepped closer, reaching out to grab her arm. Big mistake. Cassandra pulled back sharply, her eyes flashing with fury. "Touch me, and I promise you, it'll be the last thing you do in this building." The air went thick with tension. The guards hesitated. Kyle's smirk faltered for the first time. Then, before anyone could react, the glass doors of the bank slammed open with a deafening crash. "What the hell is going on here?" The booming voice sent a shockwave through the crowd. All heads turned. A sharply dressed man in a tailored gray suit stormed inside, his face red with fury. The branch manager. The smug expression on Kyle's face vanished. The guards immediately stepped back. Cassandra finally allowed herself a slow exhale, her lips curling into a dangerous smirk. Now the reckoning would begin. The branch manager's face was a mask of disbelief, his eyes darting between Cassandra and the security guards. The room had fallen deathly silent, every eye trained on him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The seconds stretched on like hours. The tension was palpable. Cassandra's calm, measured composure was the only thing keeping her from lashing out. She stood there, arms crossed, watching the manager squirm. She could practically hear his thoughts racing. He had likely never seen a scene like this in his life. The irony of it all, the CEO of the very institution he managed being treated like a criminal, was almost too much to bear. The manager finally found his voice, but it was shaky, weak. Cassandra, I didn't know you were here. What seems to be the problem?" He forced a smile, but it was thin and unconvincing. Cassandra's eyes bored into him. "The problem is that your staff is treating me like a criminal, while I'm simply here to make a withdrawal." The manager's eyes flickered to the guards, and then back to Cassandra. Of course. But, this is a large sum you're requesting. There's procedure." "Don't start with that," Cassandra snapped. "You know the procedure. You know who I am." Her words hit him like a slap. The smile quickly disappeared from his face, replaced by an anxious twitch at the corner of his mouth. He hesitated, clearly unsure of how to proceed. He shot a quick glance at Kyle, the teller, whose earlier arrogance was now replaced by a nervous frown. Kyle stammered, I didn't mean any harm, ma'am. I thought, maybe you were some kind of scam artist. I've never seen you before. You've never seen me before? Cassandra echoed, her voice growing dangerously low. Are you that incompetent that you can't recognize your own boss? Or is it that you're too eager to play the part of a hero, only to end up looking like a fool? Kyle took a step back, the fear now evident in his eyes. His hand trembled as he reached for his radio, no longer as sure of himself as before. Cassandra stood there, her back straight, her voice as cutting as a blade. Call your supervisor, Kyle. Call whoever you need to. This ends now. The branch manager swallowed hard, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could say another word, the sound of footsteps echoed through the lobby. Heads turned. A tall figure emerged from the back office, his expensive suit practically radiating power. His face was stern, but there was a glint in his eyes, a glint that suggested he knew more than anyone else in the room. The man's eyes locked with Cassandra's, and for a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. A flicker of recognition passed between them. Cassandra, the man said, his voice smooth, confident. I assume there's been some sort of misunderstanding? Cassandra raised an eyebrow. You could say that. The man's gaze swept the room, taking in the awkward silence, the tension hanging in the air. Kyle, he said coldly, his voice sharp. You've made a grave mistake. Kyle's face turned white, his hands still trembling as he lowered the radio. The security guards shifted uneasily, not knowing whether to step forward or remain in place. Everyone in the room seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the next move. I'm sorry, Mr. Daniels, Kyle muttered, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I thought she was. A scam artist? Cassandra finished for him, her tone biting. You'd be wise to remember who you're speaking to before you decide to make assumptions. Daniels, the bank's district manager, now stood between Cassandra and the other employees, his imposing figure adding an extra layer of weight to the already heavy atmosphere. He gestured for the security guards to step back, and they hesitated before obeying. Kyle's face flushed red. He tried to find the words to apologize, but they caught in his throat. He could only stand there, feeling like a child who'd just been caught in a lie. Cassandra, Daniels said, his voice lowering to a more personal tone. I'll have a word with Kyle later. But for now, let's get this resolved. I'm sure you don't want to be dealing with this nonsense. Cassandra's eyes narrowed. She didn't trust Daniels. Not for a second. I want my withdrawal, and I want it now, she said, her voice unwavering. Daniels hesitated for a moment before nodding. Of course. Right away. But just as Daniels turned to motion for the teller to process the transaction, a sharp voice interrupted. Hold up. You're telling me this woman is the CEO of the bank. The new voice came from the back of the room, belonging to a well-dressed woman who had just stepped through the entrance. She was tall, with sharp features and an air of authority that matched Cassandra's. Her eyes were narrowed, her gaze suspicious. Daniels turned sharply. Vera, what are you doing here? Vera, the head of the bank's security department, pushed past the manager and walked toward the counter. Her eyes flickered over the room, taking in the situation. She glanced at Cassandra, then back at Kyle and the guards. There was something about her expression, something that made the air feel even thicker. I was just on my way to the vault, Vera said, her voice low and guarded. I heard something about a fraud situation. Is that true, Kyle? Kyle opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The tension had reached its peak. All eyes were now on Vera. Cassandra raised an eyebrow, watching her every move. It seems your staff has a habit of misjudging people. Vera's gaze snapped to Cassandra. The two women locked eyes for a brief moment, and it was as if the entire world around them disappeared. In that moment, Cassandra could feel the weight of the room's energy shift. Something was off. Vera wasn't just here to oversee security. She had a hidden agenda, one that Cassandra hadn't fully uncovered. Vera smiled coldly. I don't know what's going on here, but I'll make sure it's handled. I'll get you your withdrawal, Miss Holloway. But first, she trailed off, her eyes now fixed on the guards. Then, just as quickly as it started, Vera turned and walked toward the vault, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Cassandra watched her every step, her mind racing. What was Vera up to? Why did it feel like there was more to this situation than met the eye? And then it hit her. The realization that the only thing standing between her and the truth might be the very people who ran this bank. Vera's heels clicked across the marble floor as she moved toward the vault, her presence commanding the room. Cassandra's eyes tracked her every step, her mind racing with questions. Something wasn't right, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a simple case of mistaken identity. The room had fallen into a tense silence, broken only by the faint hum of the bank's fluorescent lights overhead. Kyle stood by the counter, his face still flushed, nervously shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The security guards were no better, their hands twitching near their holsters, unsure of what to do next. It was clear they were all waiting for the next move, whether it came from Daniels, Vera, or Cassandra herself. "I'll handle it," Daniels said, his voice low but firm, as he stepped toward Cassandra. His gaze flickered over her, his eyes cold with calculated indifference. "Let's get this over with. Follow me to my office, and we'll finalize the withdrawal." Cassandra didn't move. Instead, she remained standing at the counter, her eyes locked on Vera's retreating form. She didn't trust Daniels, not for a second. He had been far too eager to sweep this whole thing under the rug. There was something he was hiding, something that wasn't adding up. And she wasn't going to let it go. "I think I'll wait here," Cassandra said, her voice icy. "I'm not going anywhere until I have my money." Daniels gave her a hard look, his jaw tightening. "You're not in a position to make demands, Miss Holloway." Cassandra's lips curled into a thin smile. "I think I am." The tension in the air thickened, and for a moment, it seemed like Daniels was going to argue further. But then his expression shifted, as if he had made a decision. He turned away, striding toward his office without another word. Cassandra didn't take her eyes off Vera as she disappeared into the vault area. There was something about her that sent a chill down Cassandra's spine. The woman's cold, calculated demeanor felt all too familiar. She'd seen it before in the boardrooms of major corporations, the kind of ruthlessness that made people like Vera dangerous. But Cassandra wasn't about to back down. She wasn't going to let anyone intimidate her. A few long minutes passed before Vera emerged from the vault area, holding a small, leather-bound folder in her hand. Her eyes met Cassandra's briefly, but the moment was fleeting. She didn't say a word as she crossed the room, walking toward Danielle's office. Cassandra's gaze flickered to the other employees, who were still watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. Some of them were whispering to each other, while others stared with wide eyes. Cassandra didn't care about them. Her focus remained squarely on Vera, who now stood just outside Danielle's office, waiting. Cassandra's instincts were screaming at her to move, to do something, but she held back. There was a bigger game being played here, and she needed to be smart about how she approached it. Danielle's voice drifted out from behind the office door. "Vera, what's this about? We've already discussed the withdrawal. It's a simple procedure. Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be." "I agree," Vera's voice responded, her tone sharp and authoritative. "But I think there are some things we need to address first." The door clicked open, and both of them disappeared inside. Cassandra's pulse quickened. She knew that this was it, the moment that everything would either fall into place or completely unravel. She didn't wait. Without thinking, she strode toward the office door, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to know what was going on. But as she reached for the handle, the door swung open abruptly, nearly knocking her off balance. "Ms. Holloway," Daniels said, his tone laced with forced politeness. "I think it's time we clear the air. Please come in." Cassandra stepped inside without hesitation, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Daniels was seated behind his desk, his hands folded in front of him. Vera stood near the window, her back to the room, her posture rigid. There was an air of unease hanging over them, like they were both waiting for something to happen. "I assume you've made your decision?" Cassandra said, her voice steady despite the chaos bubbling beneath the surface. Daniels met her gaze, his eyes flickering briefly before he spoke. "We've decided that we need to take a closer look at the transaction history before we can release such a large sum. It's standard procedure. There's no need for alarm." Cassandra's stomach churned. This wasn't just about a withdrawal. It wasn't about procedure. There was something deeper, something far more sinister going on, and she was about to find out exactly what that was. "Take a closer look?" she repeated, her voice icy. "You're delaying the process for what reason? I've given you everything you need. I am the CEO of this bank. My account is in perfect standing. You have no reason to deny me." Daniel sighed, his hands folding tighter. "The thing is, Ms. Holloway, we've come across some discrepancies in your account. Some large transfers, some unusual activity. We've been investigating, and it seems that there may be more going on here than you realize. Cassandra's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced. Discrepancies? Unusual activity? She'd been running the bank for years, and she knew her account better than anyone. What was he talking about? Vera, who had remained silent until now, turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You've been involved in some questionable transactions, Cassandra," she said softly, her voice dripping with malice. "You didn't think we'd notice?" Cassandra's breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" Daniels leaned forward, his eyes glinting with something dark, something calculating. "You've been laundering money, Cassandra. For years. And we've got the proof." Cassandra's world stopped. Her pulse pounded in her ears, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in around her. This couldn't be happening. She had built this bank from the ground up. She had done nothing but work tirelessly to make it successful. She had never once done anything illegal. And yet here they were, accusing her of a crime she didn't commit. "I've done no such thing," Cassandra said through clenched teeth. "You're making a massive mistake." Vera's smile was cold, triumphant. "We'll see about that." Just as she spoke, a sharp knock echoed from the door. Everyone froze. The door cracked open, and a man in a dark suit stepped inside. His face was familiar, too familiar. He was the head of the bank's internal audit division. His name was Robert Dean, and he was holding a folder. He looked directly at Cassandra, and for the first time since he entered the room, his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with tension. Before anyone could answer, Robert slid the folder across the desk to Daniels. His hand lingered on the folder for a moment, as if he was trying to read the situation in the room. Daniels picked up the folder and glanced inside. His eyes widened. The room went deathly quiet. And then, in a low voice, Robert said, "It's time to end this, Cassandra. You're done." The tension in the room was so thick, it felt like the walls were closing in. Cassandra's heart raced in her chest, the overwhelming weight of Robert's words hanging in the air. "It's time to end this, Cassandra. You're done." The words echoed in her ears, but it was the look on Robert's face that sent a chill down her spine. He wasn't just here to deliver news. He was here to take her down. She took a slow breath, her hands clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Done," she repeated, her voice sharp, though her insides churned with disbelief. "What are you talking about? This is nothing but a scheme to discredit me, to undermine everything I've worked for." Robert didn't flinch. His eyes were cold, calculating, devoid of any empathy. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice flat. "There's evidence, Cassandra. Hard proof that you've been laundering money through your own accounts. The transfers are traced. The amounts are too large to be ignored." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I've been working on this investigation for months. Your time is up." Daniels, still seated at the desk, exchanged a quick, uneasy glance with Vera. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, and Cassandra was the only one standing tall in the face of it all. But on the inside, the walls were beginning to crack. Laundering money? The very thought was absurd. But as Robert opened the folder and slid a stack of documents across the desk, Cassandra's stomach dropped. She didn't want to look at them, but she had to. She reached for the papers, flipping through them one by one, her fingers trembling as they skimmed over the numbers. Transactions. Dates. Amounts. The deeper she went, the more the reality of the situation began to sink in. Cassandra's breath hitched. These weren't her transactions. These weren't any transfers she'd made. They were fake. Someone had forged her identity, using her name to funnel money through various channels. She stopped at the last page, where a signature that wasn't hers was clearly stamped. "This is wrong," she whispered, a feeling of dread washing over her. "This isn't my doing." Robert leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her. "It doesn't matter if it's your doing or not, Cassandra. It's tied to you, and you're responsible for your own accounts. Whether you were complicit or just negligent doesn't change the fact that the money trail leads straight to you." Cassandra looked up from the papers, her mind racing. The walls were closing in, the air growing thicker by the second. She had to clear her name, but the pieces weren't fitting together. Whoever was behind this had covered their tracks well. Too well. "Don't you think it's strange?" Cassandra asked, her voice steady but desperate. "Don't you think it's strange that I would be involved in something like this?" Vera stepped forward, her eyes cold. "It's not about what you think, Cassandra. It's about the facts. The facts don't lie." She glanced at Robert, a brief nod passing between them. "And the facts say you're guilty. The coldness in Vera's voice cut through Cassandra like a knife. She had trusted these people. She had worked with them for years. And now they were turning on her, treating her like a criminal. She could feel the weight of their betrayal pressing down on her chest, threatening to suffocate her. "Look," Daniels finally spoke, his voice laced with a calm that only made Cassandra more suspicious. "It doesn't have to go this far. We don't have to make this public. We can settle this behind closed doors. All we need is for you to sign a few things, acknowledge your involvement, and maybe we can keep this out of the press." Cassandra's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? I'm not signing anything. I'm not guilty of anything. If there's a real investigation, then let it happen. But I'm not going down like this." The room was silent for a moment, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Robert's eyes flickered with something that resembled frustration, but he quickly masked it. "You don't have a choice, Cassandra," he said, his voice hardening. "This is bigger than you. This isn't just about you anymore." A strange, unsettling thought crossed her mind. Who else was involved in this? Before she could say another word, the door opened suddenly, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It was the bank's legal counsel, a man named Adrian who had worked with her for years. His presence seemed to bring a wave of relief, but it quickly dissipated when she saw the expression on his face. It wasn't the reassuring smile she expected. It was grim, filled with uncertainty. "Adrian," Cassandra's voice trembled slightly, despite herself. "What's going on?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He locked eyes with Daniels and Vera before turning his attention to Cassandra. He looked conflicted. That was the only word for it. I need to talk to you privately," Adrian said softly, his voice low. But there was something in his tone that made Cassandra's stomach twist with unease. "Not now, Adrian," Daniels interjected, standing abruptly. "We're in the middle of something important." Adrian took a step toward him, his posture stiff, but his gaze didn't waver. "This is important too, Daniels. This has to be dealt with right now." The exchange between the two men was tense, but Cassandra barely noticed. She was still processing the implications of Robert's accusations. Money laundering, a crime she never committed, but now she was being painted as the mastermind. There was only one way this could end if she didn't find a way out. With her in jail, or worse, her reputation shattered forever. Adrian finally stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Cassandra, there's something you need to know." Her heart skipped a beat. She was ready to listen, desperate for anything that might explain this nightmare. But as he spoke, his words made her blood run cold. "There's more to this than you realize," Adrian said, his voice steady but filled with an edge of urgency. "You've been set up, but the people behind it aren't just targeting you. They're targeting everything you've built." Cassandra's mind raced, but before she could process what he was saying, the sound of a loud crash echoed from down the hall, followed by frantic shouting. Everyone froze. "What was that?" Vera demanded, her voice tense with alarm. Adrian's face went pale, and he turned quickly toward the door. This isn't over yet. You need to be careful. Whoever's behind this, they're coming for you." But before Cassandra could react, another crash rang out, louder this time, and the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. The silence that followed was deafening. The darkness was suffocating, pressing down on everyone in the room, thick and heavy. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat as the faint echoes of the crash reverberated through the halls of the bank. Her heart pounded in her chest, the silence after the lights flickered feeling far more ominous than it had any right to be. What the hell just happened? Danielle's voice was tight, full of panic as he fumbled for his phone. Adrian's hand shot out, grabbing Danielle's arm with surprising force. "Get a hold of yourself," he snapped, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not safe here." Cassandra felt her skin prickling, a cold shiver running down her spine. Something wasn't right. The crash, there was no mistaking it. This wasn't just some random accident. Someone was trying to make a statement, and the lights going out only added to the tension. It was as if the world outside had gone silent, and all that remained was the danger that loomed just beyond the walls. "Is everyone all right?" Vera's voice broke through the tension, and it was laced with authority, though her words did little to calm the growing unease. She had already moved toward the door, her figure a shadow in the dim light. "I'm fine," Daniels muttered, shaking off Adrian's grip as he unlocked his phone, his fingers trembling slightly. Cassandra didn't trust any of them, not now. Her mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Adrian had said she'd been set up. set up by someone who wanted to destroy everything she'd built. But why? Who? And how far did this reach? She needed answers, and she needed them now. "I think we should get out of here," Vera said, her voice suddenly strained. "If someone's causing this kind of disruption, we're not safe." Daniels nodded, looking over his shoulder at Cassandra. "That's a good idea. We'll figure this out later." But Cassandra wasn't ready to run. She couldn't leave without understanding what was going on, without knowing who was pulling the strings behind the curtains. She couldn't afford to be seen as weak, not now. Not when everything was falling apart. She took a steadying breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "I'm not going anywhere. Not until I get the answers I need." Adrian's eyes widened as he realized Cassandra wasn't backing down. "Cassandra, you don't understand. They're coming for you. This is bigger than you think." A sudden noise, a muffled shout from down the hall, made everyone freeze. Cassandra's blood ran cold as she instinctively moved toward the door, peeking into the hallway. It was hard to see in the darkness, but she could make out the shapes of people moving in the shadows. Figures, multiple figures, coming toward the office. "They're here," Adrian said, his voice a whisper of panic. "They've found us." Vera's hand shot out, gripping Cassandra's arm. "We need to go. Now!" But Cassandra jerked away, refusing to be dragged into a corner like a frightened child. "No, I'm not leaving until I find out who's behind this." Her voice was calm, controlled, too controlled. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, pounding, growing louder as the shadows in the hallway crept closer. A figure emerged from the darkness, his face hidden beneath a hood, but the glint of a gun in his hand made everything freeze. "Don't move," the man's voice rang out, low and menacing. His accent was hard to place, but the threat was clear. Cassandra's heart hammered in her chest. The room went silent again as they all froze in place. She could feel the weight of the gun's presence hanging in the air, like it was aimed directly at her. "Who are you?" Vera's voice trembled as she demanded an answer. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a step forward, his gaze flickering over the room before it settled on Cassandra. "You," he said in a harsh whisper. "I was wondering when you'd finally figure it out." Her breath caught in her throat. "He knows me?" But she didn't have time to process his words. "Get down!" Adrian shouted suddenly, shoving Cassandra to the ground. Before she could react, a loud bang echoed through the hall, followed by the sickening sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Her vision blurred as she landed hard on the cold marble, pain shooting through her body. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog, but the gunshot had knocked the wind out of her. "Stay down," Adrian said urgently, crouching next to her as the sounds of movement grew louder. The room was in chaos now. A rush of footsteps echoed from the hall, people shouting, running, trying to escape. Daniels, who had previously been too busy with his phone, was now fumbling for his gun, panic written all over his face. Vera's sharp voice cut through the chaos. "We have to leave now." But Cassandra couldn't leave. Not like this. She had to understand who was pulling the strings, who was trying to destroy her. The figure in the hallway advanced, his footsteps heavy, and then a new sound filled the air. The whirring of machinery. The lights above flickered, then blinked out completely, plunging them into total darkness once again. The world seemed to come to a screeching halt. The only thing Cassandra could hear now was the pounding of her heart and the shallow, frantic breaths of the others in the room. Then another voice, a different one, more familiar, cut through the darkness. "Don't move, Cassandra." Her body froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was Robert's voice. But it wasn't coming from the man in the hallway. It was coming from somewhere deeper within the shadows. The voice echoed, distant but clear. Cassandra's blood ran cold as she slowly turned toward the sound of his voice. What was going on? Had Robert been part of this all along? Had he orchestrated it from the very beginning? Or was there someone else pulling the strings, someone more powerful than she ever realized? The figure in the hallway shifted again, and through the crack of light from the hallway, Cassandra could see the familiar outline of Robert's silhouette emerging from the darkness. Her breath caught. The man who had been her supposed ally, the one who had delivered her the damning evidence, was now the very person she suspected was behind all of it. "Robert," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. You're the one." Robert didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the light, and for the first time, Cassandra saw the cold, calculating expression on his face. "You should have stayed out of it, Cassandra," Robert said, his voice calm, but there was a vicious edge to it. "Now you'll pay the price." The room went silent again. And then the final bombshell dropped. A second figure stepped forward from the shadows. And Cassandra's heart stopped. It was Adrian. The world around Cassandra seemed to slow as Adrian stepped forward, his shadow merging with Robert's in the dim light. The moment felt like an eternity, her mind scrambling to process what had just unfolded. Adrian, the very man who had warned her of the danger, the one who had promised her he was on her side, was standing beside Robert, his expression cold and calculating. The realization hit her like a slap to the face. Adrian had been in on it all along. Her stomach twisted as she searched his eyes, desperately hoping she had misunderstood. But the steely look in his eyes left no room for doubt. He was part of this. He was the one who had betrayed her. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Why? Why would you do this?" Adrian's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that sent chills down her spine. "It was always about power, Cassandra. You were too naive to see it. You were too focused on being the face of this bank, too blinded by your own success. But I saw the cracks. I saw your weakness. And I knew I could take everything from you." Her mind was reeling, the betrayal stinging like 100 needles piercing her skin. All the late nights, all the sacrifices, all the work she had put into the bank, Adrian had watched it all crumble. And now, he was ready to finish her off. "You were just a pawn, Cassandra," Robert said, his voice low and smug. "A tool to get us where we wanted. And now, you've outlived your usefulness." Cassandra clenched her fists at her sides, her anger burning hotter with every word they spoke. No, she wasn't going to let this happen. She wasn't going to let them win. "You think you've won?" Cassandra said, her voice strong now, unwavering. "You think you can just take everything from me and walk away? No, you're wrong. This isn't over. I will expose you. I will make sure the truth comes out." Robert's eyes darkened. "You think anyone will believe you?" he sneered. "You've already been framed. The evidence is all over the place. It's your word against ours." "But it's not just your word, is it?" Cassandra retorted, her mind spinning with a plan. "You've underestimated me. You thought you could make me disappear, but I've been building something you don't know about. I've got a backup, a huge one." She wasn't sure if her words were as convincing as she wanted them to be, but she could feel the tension shifting. For a moment, Robert and Adrian exchanged an uneasy glance. They didn't expect her to fight back. They thought they had her cornered. Adrian sneered. "You think you have something up your sleeve? You're a fool." But Cassandra wasn't listening to him anymore. Her eyes darted to the far corner of the room, where her personal assistant, Mia, had been standing quietly in the shadows. Mia wasn't just an assistant. She was Cassandra's eyes and ears in the office, and the person who had helped her gather intel over the years. The same Mia who had worked tirelessly with her on securing a set of files she'd kept hidden for the longest time. And those files contained everything. Cassandra took a step toward Mia, who quickly reached into her bag, pulling out a flash drive and tossing it across the room. Without hesitation, Cassandra snatched it from the air, her heart racing. "This is it," she thought. "This is how I turn the tables." She didn't waste a second. She plugged the flash drive into her phone, her hands shaking as she navigated to the encrypted file. She had set this up months ago, knowing that Robert and Adrian might eventually betray her. Every transfer, every shady deal they made, every document that proved their involvement in the money laundering, everything was on that flash drive. It was all the leverage she needed to expose them. As the file opened, Cassandra's breath hitched. There it was. Every bit of evidence she needed. Screenshots of conversations, recorded phone calls, bank statements. Everything that could destroy Robert and Adrian's carefully constructed empire. But then, as she scanned the files, her phone screen suddenly went black. A cold, sickening fear gripped her. "No, not now. Not when I'm this close." "Cassandra." Adrian's voice was low, almost a growl. "It's over." But Cassandra wasn't done yet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a second, hidden phone, a backup that Robert and Adrian hadn't known about. She quickly pulled up the same files, her fingers moving with precision. "What are you doing?" Robert spat. "You think this is going to change anything? The system's already been rigged. No one will believe you." Cassandra didn't reply. Instead, she sent the files to her lawyer, a trusted ally who had been waiting for this moment. The lawyer had been prepared for this day, and now, with just a tap on her phone screen, everything Robert and Adrian had done was about to come to light. "Don't be so sure," Cassandra said, her voice calm now, but full of a quiet fury. "You're going to regret underestimating me." A loud crash sounded in the hallway, followed by the sound of rushing footsteps. Adrian's face twisted with anger. "You think you're going to walk away from this? After everything we've done?" "I think," Cassandra said with a grin, "you've made a huge mistake." At that moment, the door burst open, and the sound of sirens filled the air. Police officers stormed into the room, their guns drawn and their faces hard. They immediately began to restrain Robert and Adrian, who were too stunned to react. Cassandra's lawyer stepped into the room, holding a folder with the very same evidence Cassandra had just sent. "You're under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy, and fraud," the officer said, his voice cold. As they cuffed Robert and Adrian, Cassandra stood tall, a sense of triumph washing over her. She had done it. She had exposed them. The truth was out, and there was no turning back for them now. "Thank you," she whispered to Mia, who stood beside her, her face filled with relief. Cassandra turned to face the officers, her confidence unwavering. "I'll make sure the world knows what you tried to do to me, and I'll make sure justice is served." The officers nodded, their eyes filled with respect. As they led Robert and Adrian away, Cassandra allowed herself one last moment of satisfaction. She had taken down the men who had tried to ruin her. The bank's reputation would be restored. She would rebuild what they had torn down, and she would never let anyone push her down again. Bank CEO denied withdrawal at her own bank. She makes them regret it immediately. And so she did. If you're inspired by Cassandra's strength and determination, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to like this video and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to stand up against the odds? Let us know how you handled it, because we all have the power to turn things around. Stay tuned for more intense stories, and remember, no matter what happens, justice will always prevail. Subscribe, like, and comment, because the fight for justice never ends.